Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Hamilton East, Stoney Creek.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's with very, very mixed emotions I stand today to speak to this particular motion from my good friend from Hamilton Centre, and I want to begin, I suppose, Mr. Speaker, by congratulating the President and Executive of USWA 1005 who fought tooth and nail for the last number of years, along with us in the NDP, both locally and nationally. The NDP have spoken out on this since this deal was initiated in 2007. I was elected to this House, Mr. Speaker, in 2006, and for that many years, from 2007, we have been trying to get the essence of that deal put before the public. And so the motion that comes from my friend that calls for the government to apologize to the Hamilton community and to our country nationally for approving the U.S. deal takeover of Stelco because it failed to provide a net benefit. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. You will know, Mr. Speaker, that any foreign takeover bid requires a review that looks to a net benefit for Canada. And it also calls for that particular deal to be made public. U.S. Steel and the Government of Canada, under the Investment Act, the Canadian Investment Act, with respect to the acquisition of Stelco in 2007, and the 2011 out-of-court settlement, both of these documents and the materials that support them, the evidence that support them, should be made public. What is the possible reason for so much secretiveness in this particular arrangement? The tidbits of information that USWA were able to get came from the United States, of all places, Mr. Speaker. There was a court action in the United States where some of it was made public. We could turn to the United States to get information our own government won't provide. And the final part of the good member's bill is to ensure employee pensions are protected, including amending the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and the Companies Creditor Arrangement Act. Now, you will recall, Mr. Speaker, that in my time a number of years ago, around 2008 to 2011, I was the critic on behalf of our party that dealt with pensions. And I proposed a piece of legislation at that time to the government. I didn't table it in the House, but I went to the government. I went to Ted Menzies, the parliamentary secretary of the day, and said to him, here's a bill that will put the pensioners at the head of the line as secured debt in the case of bankruptcy and insolvency. These are deferred wages, Mr. Speaker, very clearly the property of the workers. And at that time, in fairness to Mr. Menzies, he said he would take it to others in the cabinet and see what he could do. And ultimately, the government said no, that they weren't prepared to do it. They had some concerns. But can you imagine today, in the situation that Stelco was in, if that had been passed? And it was also proposed to the government prior to Nortel's debacle. As we know, they had somewhere in the area of $6 billion of assets, and the pensioners' pensions were cut 37%. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, 450 people that were on benefits who were not employable lost everything. So that there certainly was room for a change. You know, there's so much to talk about in this particular circumstance. You give consideration that this particular company, under the name of Stelco, in 2004 already went through CCAA protection. At that time, there was a tremendous pushback from the people of Hamilton in particular, and USWA in particular as well, against the move. There was a $545 million in long-term debt, Mr. Speaker, $1.3 billion deficit in the pension fund obligations is what we understand of those times. And we moved forward from that. They came out of that, and millions of dollars went to the person who represented the company, who went back to the United States, somewhere in the area of $50 million, when there was a debt of this nature. And then we had several suitors for the company. I recall meeting with the vice president of Sevastol from the then, no, I guess it wouldn't have been the Soviet Union, it was Russia by that time. They had a mining company north of Moscow, 800 miles north, where they built hospitals for their workers. They paid their taxes for them. In that part of the world, they were having trouble with abuse of vodka, and circuses are still part of that culture at the time, so they started a circus training school. In other words, they had a commitment to the workers, and they offered to come to Hamilton, and as I recall, they offered $350 million investment in the plant in Hamilton. They offered to assume the debt and pay off the pension debt. The powers that be took the decision to go to U.S. Steel instead. And the end result is the workers of Hamilton are paying a terrible penalty for that decision. It's certainly not a net benefit to the 8,000 retirees that are looking at losing somewhere in the area of 20% of their pension, if not more, depending on where the market is, if that was to be shut down. And clearly, Mr. Speaker, it is the outlook that they're facing, that the company wants to sell, so they want to divest themselves of those obligations so that they make the company saleable. So we have to sit back here and wonder, where was this government? Where was this government when it was their obligation to protect the workers and the investors in Canada when this deal was put together? Where was this government when they were supposed to be standing up for the workers of Hamilton? Is this a model of what other companies can expect? To be sold down the river because you're not prepared to stand up for your own country, your own workers in your own country? It is shocking when you consider that this government will not share the information with its own citizens. It's beyond comprehension. You know, 2008, 2009, Mr. Speaker, U.S. Steel laid off 700 workers in Hamilton. They had made a commitment that they were going to sustain and maintain employment. 2009, they shut down most of its Canadian operations, locked out workers in a labor dispute in Hamilton. You know, and they shut down the blast furnace in 2009. And if you understand the workings of a blast furnace, Mr. Speaker, when you shut them down, if they're down for any length of time, they are ruined. They can't be used again. So by shutting it down, they were signaling to the people of Hamilton that they were walking away from Hamilton. So we're sitting here today facing a situation where at one point the Canadian government looked at that deal, whatever it says, and said that the U.S. Steel did not live up to it. So they took them to court. And for a moment in Hamilton, we started to say, maybe the government is starting to consider supporting the workers of this community. So what happens as the court proceedings went on and we were led to understand that they were going to be successful, there was an arrangement between the company and the government to end the lawsuit. Now, for the people that have been out of work, they would have got past wages for the time they would have been off the job because they had violated the agreement. Instead of going to court, getting that resolution, there was a private deal made, and that private deal, Mr. Speaker, did nothing for the workers in Hamilton. There was a token payment made to some people in Hamilton, monies that were made there and paid in the sense of a very, very small portion of the obligations of over $1.2 billion to that pension plan. So going back to the original motion, at the very least, Mr. Speaker, this government should be apologizing to the people of Hamilton, to the workers at U.S. Steel, formerly Stelco. At the very least. And you know, they need to make public those undertakings. Because even with the bad taste that people have in their mouth about all of this, they still are trying to somehow understand what has happened. So they have to look, they should be given the opportunity to look at the undertakings between U.S. Steel and the government with regards to employment, steel production, and the ongoing funding of that pension plan, which was not done, Mr. Speaker. So I'm close to the end of my time. I'm saddened. I'm saddened that we find ourselves at this place in time. And again, I want to commend the member from Hamilton Centre This is probably 40 or 50 times we've been in this House over the last 8 years speaking out on this. And the government has not been listening, Mr. Speaker, and it's very evident. Thank you.
Resuming debate. Please